The history of Afghanistan. You've heard of Afghanistan, but where is it? Right there. Hey kids, Mr. Swanside here. Super excited to read this book, Shooting Kabul. But before we do, I want to learn a little bit more about Afghanistan. Fatty and his family in the story flee Afghanistan and move to the United States. So, why did they flee? What is this country about? Well, what I want you to know is, although in this book it may seem like it's scary, the country wasn't always that way, and it isn't that way. Actually, Afghanistan it's a landlocked country in Central Asia. It's a small country, a little bit smaller than Texas, but it has a big history and a rich culture. Let's check out exactly where it is. So when you look, you can see that it's this little small country landlocked between Pakistan, Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, right? And if we scroll in and click on it, the area that we are going to be talking about is right here, Kabul, which is the capital. And that is where Fadi and his family start out. So, we learned a little bit about the geography. Now I want to take some time and talk about the people that make up the country, their languages, their culture. And I want to say this, right? We're going to talk about the people and the languages, and some really good things are going to come about it. But then we're going to get into talking about the government and some groups that have tried to take over the Afghani people, and they're not nice, right? Some of it it's going to sound familiar. You're going to know about it, but I don't want that to make you think that Afghanistan is full of bad people or it's a bad country, because it's not. People could say the same thing about the United States. People could say the same thing about a lot of countries. But at the end of the day, there's still really good people and really cool cultures and really amazing food and really fun, interesting, super cool traditions that make up these countries. So just want you to remember that. But we're going to talk a little bit about the people, about the languages, a little about the modern government, which might help you out with your timeline. So, the people of Afghanistan speak many different languages, right? They speak particularly Dari, which is a form of Persian, and Pashto. Notice that people do not all speak Arabic, although they often learn it, right? It's not their native language, but they definitely learn it. People belong to many different ethnic groups. Too, almost everyone is Muslim, but there's two kinds. There's the Sunni branch and there's the Shia branch. And Sunni and Shia are kind of like Protestant and Catholics are to Christians, right? So Sunni and Shia to Muslims are like Protestants and Catholics to Christians. Just two different types of Muslims, but still Muslims. So most people are illiterate, which means they can't read and write. And this is for a couple reasons, right? This is because of many years of war that interrupted people's education. Also, the fact that girls are not able to go to school during the time of the Taliban regime, if you will, or reign. The life expectancy is much shorter than U.S. And a lot of this, there's babies that die at birth. Young children often die because of lack of medical care, and fighting has claimed the lives of others. So let's take a little bit about history in the past 30 to 40 years. So Afghanistan has had a long history, but during the past several 100 years it has been controlled by Great Britain, or England and Russia. And by the 1960s, Afghanistan seemed to be succeeding as an independent country, even had its own constitution, its own elected officials. But in the 1970s, Afghani people started fighting about what kind of government they wanted. And by 1979, the Soviet Union began sending military forces to help one side of the conflict. So for the next 10 years, there was fighting, both a civil war with different groups of Afghanis fighting each other, and an invasion by the Soviet army. Many people were killed, and millions of others became refugees, which we've talked about refugees. That's what Fadi and his family are in this case. People who left their homes to flee a neighboring country. In Fadi's case, they actually went to the United States, but many would go to Pakistan or Iran. In 1988 and early 1989, the Soviet army left Afghanistan. And unfortunately, the civil war continued and grew worse. And by 1994, there was a group named the Taliban, which you might have heard of. They started to gain control in Afghanistan, and soon they took over the entire country. So, Taliban were Muslim fundamentalists, which means that they wanted their strict religions and values to become the law of the country. And so there were some things that they required of men and women. So men had to grow their beards and had to follow many rules. Women couldn't leave the house. They were forbidden to work. They couldn't go out of the house without men. So oftentimes families were starving, and because the men would die in war. And so, in addition, they were required to wear burqas, which was a full body veil covering their entire body. Girls were not allowed to go to school. Anyone that was caught teaching or secretly teaching or attending girls' schools could be killed, and many people didn't like this government, right? So fighting continued. And by the late 1990s, the United Nations and the United States were against the Taliban government because of the terrible things that it was doing to its own people. And in 2001, where we've all heard of the 9/11 attacks, right? So, which was where the Taliban assisted Al-Qaeda and its leader, Osama bin Laden, in attacking the Twin Towers and the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. And so Osama bin Laden was actually from Saudi Arabia, but was living in Afghanistan. So for that reason, U.S. Brought troops and attacked, declared war on Afghanistan to kick the Taliban out. So today, Afghanistan has a new government, with a new elected government, and international troops have tried to help the recovery, right? You may have heard the news where, we're trying to withdraw the troops from Afghanistan, but the Taliban is still definitely an important force that is trying to take over Afghanistan, and whether or not they succeed, there are still many important issues on which people disagree. How women should dress and behave, should girls go to school, should all education be religious, how should the government be organized, so which ethnic group should lead the country. So these are all things that continue to come up. And we're going to talk about it more, and you will find things and events as you search your timeline and look for events within the history of Afghanistan, and we're going to discuss that more. So important that you learn about the country and learn about the culture, learn about the situation where Fadi and his family are coming from. I think that really sets up the story, and will make it much more meaningful as you read through it. So enjoy.